Will StatsBomb, the new data-driven recruitment method used by many clubs, help Newcastle make waves in the transfer window? And will the returning players of Newcastle United be ready for their next challenge, trophy challenge, and Premier League challenge in this upcoming Premier League and Cup fixture? Find out here on ToonTactics TV. All right. Good evening, folks, or maybe good day, wherever you are. We do have a percentage, or good evening, good morning, wherever you are. We do have a percentage of global viewers, which is incredible for the channel. We've got people in America, in Africa, in different places of the world now beginning to listen to this small but growing channel. I hope you are all well. I hope you all had a blessed day. And look, I'm so excited about today's show because I had in my preparations. In fact, I'll show you guys. I had in my preparations so many different things lined up that I wanted to show to you and speak with you about. But Mr. Mark Douglas, who we know is the journalist who had the hour and a half long interview with our sports director Paul Mitchell, he has released another article which I will show you folks about, and really it just couldn't be ignored. And I'd say, you know what, I'm gonna have to make a slight detour. But look, let's make sure we kick things off well. Let's talk about this particular article, but also I'm gonna talk about various other things in the show, which I'm gonna take this off stage a little bit. I'm gonna take it off stage. Because it's an incredible article that he wrote. Let me put this on. Here we go. Add on stage. Here we go. So, because of the paywall, I'm not gonna. Obviously, I paid for the paywall, but I'm not gonna go through all of it. In itself, obviously, we're talking about now Mark Douglas's release of his article today around all the stats bomb, this kind of method, this approach to essentially will help Newcastle and has been helping Newcastle in their search for talented players and kind of ensure that they recruit well and make the right decision. But I'm going to break it down, this article, in relation to the leadership of Newcastle United, the structure of Newcastle United, and everything that kind of use it to kind of point in the direction that I think that it's showing us where Newcastle United are heading to, and what's exciting about that, essentially. Now, first of all, let me start, before we actually talk about all of that stuff, essentially, let's understand what stats bomb is. So I've and it's been around actually since 2021, 2022, especially after the takeover. So it's not a new thing. It's not that Newcastle have been essentially living in the dark ages. Newcastle have been using stats bomb in different ways as part of their recruitment policy, but quite differently to what everybody else has been saying. So I'm going to first kind of break down what StatsBomb is and the data behind it and what the article is as well, because essentially the article is also partly an interview. So obviously Mark Douglas, as we know, is the Northern football correspondent who wrote this article. And I really enjoy reading his articles because they're always very, very well balanced. But the interesting thing, obviously, as we always say about Mark Douglas, is that And why? I changed my whole show because of the not only because of the article itself, but because Mr. Mark Douglas, because of the context behind Mark Douglas. Now, Mark Douglas obviously had the interview with Paul Mitchell nearly like 6 weeks ago now, maybe 2 months ago. He had an hour and a half long interview with Paul Mitchell about his transfer strategy, and there've been a number of articles that are flowed from that as well. And so he gets really good access to Newcastle United. He wrote if you go to his X account, he's also which is on his pinned profile. He also had a very extensive interview with Steve Harper, who's obviously our head of academies. And I've read it now for the second time, the article, and it reminded me just how much Newcastle have had to change, but also how well the work has been going on there. But so that's the kind of so Mark Douglas, Paul Mitchell, sports director. Now Mark Douglas is in this article. He is interviewing, but kind of partly interviewing, but also giving an account of Newcastle kind of the recruitment strategy and how Sports Bomb and this particular kind of recruitment model is helping Newcastle, Newcastle plan to use or have been using it in their kind of search for players. But he's in this interview with Ted Knutson. Ted Knutson is essentially the former CEO and founder of Sports Bomb. He sold it, I think, last year. And Ted Knutson has actually given a really helpful interviews on Irish Mags and others about his thoughts on the players that Newcastle have bought. Now, some of the background to Ted Knutson is that, as it says here, he's one of the co-founders of football analytics of a firm used by the game's biggest clubs. He's on the cutting edge of company deals, but he's also kind of very big on data and analysts, but also and kind of uses it around kind of sports betting and kind of adds that kind of model to it. Very similar. So his work actually helped pioneer Brentford's approach to their recruitment strategy, where they used the same kind of strategy that sports bettors use in terms of finding the right in terms of being able to analyze which teams are going to do well, how players are going to perform, how they kind of collect their data, and they were able to integrate into their kind of scouting data and everything else to help them to find the players that they want. And so Ted Knutson comes from that particular background, and obviously he also gives us a description of what Sports Bomb actually is. And I'm going to just read a slight excerpt from it before kind of veering into what I want to use this particular article for, which is to, as I explained earlier, to kind of talk about what this is like another point in the direction of, or another indicator of Newcastle's structure, where they're looking, where the club is heading to, the direction that they're going, what they're trying to achieve. So when Paul Mitchell talks about being first class in every department, what does that mean? We'll talk about a recruitment strategy. What does that mean? When we're kind of rumored to be connected to certain players, what's the likelihood that Newcastle are actually interested in those players, and for what purpose? Because that purpose in terms of buying and selling, and Newcastle are trying very, very hard now to become a lot better at selling. What does that mean? How do all these things tie in? And the important thing is, obviously, as our chairman said in Yasser Ramayan, his ambition for Newcastle ultimately is for Newcastle to be number one. So how do all these things point in the direction of Newcastle being number one? So essentially, StatsBomb is it holds data on 120 different competitions. It covers 3,400 matches and games. And what it allows players to do, what it allows clubs to do, is to obviously identify players, identify how good those players are, and in various leagues, and also actually measures the strengths of those leagues. It talks about in an article how if a player is like first team or 18, 19 or first teamer, for instance, playing in the Eredivisie, what does that mean in terms of if a club is thinking in Premier League is thinking, how would that player do in the Premier League? Like, what would that look like? You are able to see and analyze the strength of that league and what that would mean for you as a club if you bring this player in. What would that integration process into the not only into the team, into your first team, into the league mean? How would it look, and how can you integrate that player? Would that player even be suitable in the first place? And so it's very, very interesting. The other really interesting thing about it, before I go further, is it talks about how on the platform, it's also been possible to build a Newcastle algorithm. So it's not just to Newcastle, but say you're Newcastle, you're Barcelona, Man United. You can create a Newcastle algorithm which identifies players by position from every corner of the globe who would suit their style of play. So what would help Newcastle be is a lot more surgical in their approach to buying players, their technical requirements and experience level. That sits in the background, continually updating, acting, starting point for deciding which players Newcastle scouts should look at, take a closer look at. So we know, for instance, Newcastle are very, very heavy on trying to find a right centre-back, trying to find a player that plays on the right wing. And so we know that Eddie Howe, Paul Mitchell, our style of play, it can't just be any right wing forward. For instance, it has to be a right wing forward who suits our style of play, but also suits our approach, helps us to kind of achieve what we want to achieve on the pitch itself. And so it can be this particular model. StatsBomb could be very advantageous in that point of view. And there are clubs, not Newcastle, who have been using StatsBomb, but also their own way of using data. Liverpool being the most kind of elite and high profile of the clubs who have been using the data very, very successfully in buying and selling of their players. And I mention that because you guys remember that I've been listening to the show from previous shows that Paul Mitchell himself highlighted the fact that how Liverpool buy and sell their players, how Liverpool bought and sold players in this transfer window that made them players that barely touched the fringe of their squad, but were very effective in terms of them selling their players and allowing Liverpool to build up their transfer kitty without having to sell their big fish, as it were. So, look, StatsBomb, incredible method, incredible tool. This is another article, this little... so where do I want to take this? What does it mean for Newcastle United? Because it's all great, essentially, to have a method, a data that will help Newcastle, that help any club really, but help Newcastle in buying and getting the right players for their purpose. But there's a lot that comes into that, and now we're learning that. So, and it's highlighted in when Mark Douglas asks Ted Knutson about, well, what do you think about essentially when prior to Paul Mitchell, everything was pretty much going through Eddie Howe in terms of the recruitment structure. And now, obviously, with Paul Mitchell, that's changed. That's obviously going through Paul Mitchell. Although, obviously, Eddie Howe has a strong say in the players that come in and come in out. What does that mean for Newcastle? And what do you think, what essentially... when you're using tools like StatsBomb, when you're using data, when we're trying to figure out which players are the right players for Newcastle United going forward, essentially, how do you think that impacts them? What does it say about Eddie Howe? What do you think that says about Paul Mitchell? What do you think that kind of says about the overall structure? Which I thought was not an unfair question. It was a fine question, but obviously Ted Knutson is a data analyst. He's he's looking to for he's kind of trying to find always methods for data to help in sports betting. But it was an interesting question to ask anyway. And essentially, this is what he said. There are a bunch of misaligned incentives in football that Newcastle and a lot of other clubs in the Premier League are dealing with. And so we're talking about misaligned incentives. So, for instance, they talked about how when Eddie Howe's looking for a player, so for instance, Newcastle are linked to Mark Gahey, who at the moment is kind of rumored to be priced at 50 million plus. That people are saying it's going to possibly change. We're going to talk about that, but at the moment is valued at 50 million plus. We know, for instance, we know Paul Mitchell, not that he doesn't rate Mark Gahey, but Paul Mitchell has said there are other players in untapped markets, untapped talents, who are essentially just as good as, and this is me kind of reading between the lines, as Mark Gahey for a lower price. It's the same thing that Ted Knutson said, where he talked about where he gave his kind of overall assessment of Newcastle's purchases of players in the last couple of windows, where he said, look, like when you look at the talent of the players, great, but what doesn't make sense essentially is why they bought them, because you could have bought players for those same talents for cheaper prices if you looked elsewhere. And again, this is kind of aligns more with what Paul Mitchell is saying. And so they went into the conversation of what is essentially an incentive for Eddie Howe, which is a little bit more short term, because his goal, for instance, this season is get into Europe. We all know that he has to get that is a goal. Newcastle can't, when Newcastle he has to get into Europe. So in his mind, he and how he's been playing and the players that he needs are ready now, players ready in the sense of you're in the league, you're in the Premier League now. You are a certified Premier League player, for instance, in the profile of a Mark Gahey. Yes, I can get someone that's talented, maybe even more talented, and has better qualities in France, in Germany, in Holland. I don't know, me being Eddie Howe, how long it will take that player to integrate into the squad and to be able to achieve my goals this year, right now, to achieve these goals now, which is to get us into Europe. Whereas a Mark Gahey, when Newcastle to buy him in on January the 1st, he's ready to play on January the 2nd. If it's a Saturday, he's ready to play because he's a certified Premier League player. He's ready to jump into that right centre back spot. So that's Eddie Howe's incentive. And whereas when they're talking about Paul Mitchell now, obviously Paul Mitchell has that incentive as well, which is to get Newcastle regularly into the into the top European competitions. But there's also a long-term view, and Ted Knutson talks about it. The Newcastle owners employing a Paul Mitchell, there is a longer-term view. And we've heard it spoken through Paul Mitchell, where we've got to be more strategic, better with how we use our finances, so we can have a sustainable way of recruiting players and being competitive on the market, but also buying players. I think he called them like mid-level purchases, i.e., players who. We talked about how Liverpool bought Fabio Carvalho, and I think it was I forgot his name, 2-3 years ago, for about, for a combined fee of like 20 million, for instance. And 2, 3, 4 years later, they sold both of them in the last transfer window of £50 million. So they got £50 million without having to sell a Luis Diaz, without having to sell a Jota, without having to sell a Nunes, any of those players, in order to remain competitive in the transfer market. So Liverpool are well ahead in their curve in doing that. And so Newcastle are trying to replicate that. Paul Mitchell's trying to replicate that. So his view is a little bit more long-term. So he's got that in the back of his mind, but also he'll look at a Mark Gahey and think, but what if I can get a Tapsoba from Leverkusen for 40 million? And he's just as talented as a Mark Gahey. So that's what Ted Knutson and Mark Douglas are talking about in terms of misaligned incentives. And this is not just at Newcastle, this is at various clubs. So how do you join these together? So it's all good to have the best, for instance, if that's one of the best data-driven analytics tool, it's all good having that, but that tool can't can't align your leadership, your club's leadership. That tool can't align your club's philosophy. That's what the club has to do. So they go on to say there's maybe 5 teams that have figured out what have it figured out, while the rest are scrambling to minimize the amount of money they are losing all the time. So when you talk about having that figured out, is all the things that we just talked in the above. And the 5 teams, for instance, well, I think there's 4 that I counted, which is Man City, Liverpool, Brentford, and Brighton. And I think at some point I'm going to do a show where I'm going to look at, for instance, Brighton's previous 2-3 transfer windows to highlight. Maybe it might be a session where I have to cry how well how well their recruitment strategy, their transfer strategy is. We have to remember that this is a club in Brighton who, in the last couple of years, 3-4 transfer windows, not only have they missed, and this happens regularly, had to sell massive players like Casado, Gross, McAllister, you name it. Ben White gone 3-4 years ago. Had their entire recruitment team went to Chelsea. Their sports director, Dan Ashworth, went to us. Like, yet after with all these that being said, their recruitment strategy, their model, their club philosophy is so entwined, it's so built that they're able to regenerate, they're able to like grow back again. And where are they now? Well, they sit above us on goal difference in 6th place, 2 points behind Chelsea, who have all their sports directors and have all their scouts and all their players, including Casado, who are only 2 points ahead of them. If that is, you don't understand, in my mind, when I think about that, how incredible that is. Because imagine Newcastle, God forbid, lost Bruno Gomes, Sven Botman, Anthony Gordon, Eddie Howe, Jason Tyndall, and Paul Mitchell in the next 1, 2, 3 transfer windows. Where would Newcastle be? Where would Newcastle be? I don't think they'll be 6th in the Premier League, 2 points behind a Champions League qualification spot. This is excellence in terms of Brighton. And this is what I think is in mind of a Paul Mitchell when he's trying to create a recruitment strategy that will not only be sustainable and a team that is competitive on the pitch, but also a club that is an elite club and competitive on all levels. So that's his incentive. But that's the bigger picture of that is that's what the owners want. That's what the owners want. And so if I'm Yasser Al-Rumayyan when he made that trip, and I'm going to go on, when he made that trip to Newcastle to kind of bridge the gap and explain the vision to Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell on what's going on. If I'm Eddie Howe, I'll be saying to him, okay, if we get a Tapsoba, for instance, if we get a William Tapsoba from Leverkusen instead of a Mark Gahey, you got to give me a margin for error almost here if we don't qualify for Europe. There's got to be some assurances essentially the overall picture that, if I'm going to bring on these players that are not Premier League certified, that you're going to give me some leeway here. Or I don't know how it would look, but those kind of conversations are being had. What is the vision from the owners? What are they trying to achieve? What is the maximum vision? What is the mid to long term vision? And what is everyone trying to do to get everybody on that same page? Because Eddie Howe's responsibility won't only just be, I think, to get a first team squad ready, which is a primary, but there will be some incentive around him. If Paul Mitchell's bringing in some of these players for Eddie Howe to also coach them, Yankuba Minte, that was the plan for him. You can see him. That was the plan for him, to recruit him. He loan him out, bring him in, see how he does, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there in the game, and kind of develop him and see what happens. Well, we're seeing what happens now. So that's what they're talking about, kind of misaligned incentives. And so Newcastle are in that process of realignment. And I talked about this before. So they're losing. So there's maybe five, and we're going to say there's maybe 5 teams that have figured it out. Like we talked about Brighton, Brentford, Liverpool, and I think they're talking about Man City. I can't think of the 5th team. If you guys know who the 5th team is, who you think that 5th team is, do let me know. So what is he going to say? So he goes on to say, go back here. There's maybe 5 teams that have figured it out, whilst the rest are scrambling to minimize the amount of money they are losing all the time, or try to get on the pitch product to get the on-pitch product really good, but are dealing with massive amounts of waste, like Chelsea are. So Chelsea are like the extreme opposite of a Brighton and Chelsea. We know what they've done. They spent 1.5, 1.6 billion buying a lot of players essentially. But it's an approach that usually takes teams 3, 4, 5 years to do. They've just did it in very, very quickly, and there's a spillover from that where you can't put all the players on the pitch essentially. But it's the idea of the model, which is to do what Brighton and others do, is good. It's just fast tracked. So there is an extreme to that, and Newcastle can't do that in the first place because of PSR and other things. So we talked about that kind of alignment, that kind of approach, and going back to that earlier conversation. So it's very, very interesting what they've said in terms of to make these things work. So it's a good thing. It's great, this stats bomb kind of being a lot more surgical in our approach and finding the right players for the team, for the first team, and also for our academies as well. You would have seen we've been buying a lot of under 18, under 17-year-olds that have been filling our academies as well. And again, go back to Mark Douglas's article around our academies, which is headed by Steve Harper. It is growing, it's developing. We need to buy more land. We need to buy more. At the moment, we're in a kind of temporary building site. It's not. We haven't really built a permanent academy yet. It's all it's temporary buildings essentially. I can't describe it. I forgot what the name for it is. And so we're buying those players. So we're kind of in that mode, that realignment process. And look, I've put this up because we talked about realigning incentives. We talked about head coach Eddie Howe has those incentives, which is to have a first team that's able to compete in the league, and for him also to what his agenda is and what he's been set tasked to get Newcastle into Europe and win trophies. So that's his agenda. Director of football Paul Mitchell is the same agenda, but also long term, which is make Newcastle competitive in the market, make Newcastle sustainable in the market, and buying and selling of players, but also make Newcastle overall talent pool within itself internally also sustainable and long term, to have players within itself, within its academies, be able to produce that can go into the first team, or if they're not successful, at least be sold on for a profit. So that again goes back into the club. And we've obviously got the CEO, Mr. Eels, who kind of is the overall charge, but the owners. So the owners' incentive. So I think for me, and I'm going to conclude this, I think for me, what this article says in terms of where the vision is at for the owners, and when I think about it, I think we're going to talk about actually a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about ATPs and all of that. The owners have seen that to be able to be the number one club, the elite, to be at the top, as Mr. Yasser Rahman said, we have to be. And people kind of took this as what Paul Mitchell was saying: be first class and everything, as a dilution of, we're not. We've realized it's a bit too competitive. We're not going to we might not win the league. I don't think that's it. In order to win the league, you have to be number one in your medical, number one in your first team, number one in your recruitment of players and everything else. And so they have to be first class in everything. I think so. With the owners essentially employing a Paul Mitchell, using these methods like stats bomb, using these kind of trying to be a lot more pinpoint, a lot more surgical, a lot more targeted in what they're doing. But also, it's not just to get players for the first team; it's also players to essentially, like I said, mids level player, mids. I forgot what they called it, mid purchases of buying and sending players to make purchases, buying and players, young players under 18s and the 17s for the academy to make Newcastle sustainable and growing as well, and going internationally in order to be able to do that. And for Paul Mitchell to be able to do that, to convince the owners, hey, this League Two player from France, we should buy him because he's going to be great in about 5 years' time. You need those type of stats bomb, those kind of data to be able to provide that. So there's a long-term vision that the owners have, and it's kind of what Paul Mitchell said this, Eddie Howe said this, is there was an initial target for Newcastle when the owners came in, which is like in 5 years' time to win the league, to be in Europe, to do all these things, but with shifting changes, not just in the league itself, in terms of seeing how competitive the league is. So, for instance, about 8, maybe 9 teams that are competing for the Champions League, but also the shifting changes with the seeing Man City, winning a court case for the ATP. We would have seen that there is a conglomerate, a cartel of Premier League clubs who are actively working against Newcastle United and the owners that are there. So in order to win, in order to be competitive on the pitch, to not just qualify for Europe and get trophies, there's all these other things. Newcastle internally, in their academy, in their medical staff, in their management, in their first team, in their recruitment of players, first team players, young players, local to foreign players, everything else on top of that, the manager that you have, all of these things have to be first class in order for Newcastle to be competitive. So that's my say on that thing. I've got a few comments on this, and it's gonna relate to the other stuff that I'm gonna talk about in today's show. It's great to see a few of you come in here. Send in your comments. Remember, folks, to like, share, and subscribe. You guys have been doing an incredible job doing that. It's really good to engage to and see some of you. Adieri Kanguma, good to see you again, sir. Hi, Philip. How are you? Amanda Stavely should invest her money in Newcastle United and come back to Newcastle. My friend, I really like you. You send this comment every time. I need to stop sending me that comment. I'm telling you, because as much as you want her back, she's not coming back. It looked like she's going to Tottenham. So, you know what? I really appreciate you sending in comments. It's really good to hear from you, but I don't think Miss Stavely is coming back, sir. The Mighty Win. Good to see you, sir. Good to see you on here. Always supporting. I appreciate you. The fifth club. Okay, the fifth club are Chelsea or Spurs. That makes sense. It's probably Chelsea. Oh, Chelsea. Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you for that. Mighty Win again. Man City's blueprint still has Pep deciding who they're buying for the first team. Well, yeah, I think essentially, and this was what was said. I know there's the thing when people say, it's in Europe it's a club approach. It's not up to the manager. Managers still have a final say. You can't just even if your club structure is around the sports director, it makes it difficult to recruit players for the first team if the manager themselves really doesn't want that player. So essentially, yes, managers have a final say, have a very strong say in how the clubs move forward with those things. And so I agree with you. I think there's still a final say. I also think, though, if you're Eddie Howe, if you're going to say no, for instance, to a Tapsoba, for instance, you have to have a very good reason as to why, especially if that player fills the requirements for the club, the long-term requirements in terms of financially for the club, potential-wise, where the club think that player is going to in terms of the levels they can reach in terms of their quality and the impact they believe will have on the first team, and kind of any other kind of requirements that particular plays. If he fits the criteria, and you're the last person on the table, being Eddie Howe, is saying, "No, I don't want him." When that player fits every other model apart from maybe that last one, which is he's not in the Premier League. That can't be the final. It'll be very difficult for Eddie Howe to say no to that and but also give a strong alternative to that player. So yes, he has a final say, but I think he has to have a very good reason, an exceptional reason as to why he has said no to that. So that's my thoughts on that. But really, really good question, guys. As always, I'm so thankful to have you guys here. An incredible article from Mark Douglas, and it kind of filters into all the other stuff I was hoping to speak about today. And I'm going to kind of put them together in terms of that. Like before this article by Mark Douglas, I was going to talk about the interview between, I still might play it, essentially on TalkSport on Simon's Jordan talking about about the cartel, how the PSR is designed to maintain the cartel. But also kind of, again, in line with what we're talking about today, how Newcastle are preparing for their transfer preparations, essentially. And that is obviously, there was another article that was written, again, by Mark Douglas around how Newcastle are preparing for the transfer window. We're talking about the potential sale of Almiron. And so what that's about essentially is that how Newcastle essentially are open to selling Mr. Almiron. That's not news. That isn't news. They've been trying to sell him for a while. Almiron, PSR, Newcastle's quest, which is an interesting word. Almiron, PSR, and Newcastle's quest for 100 million transfer kitty. Now, I'm not going to blow my own horn because I'm sure I got this right by accident, but I did say in the previous show that I think Newcastle have about 108 million to spend, just based on what I was taught about how to do the calculations. I'm not no financial expert, but it's interesting. It's 100 million. And essentially and I think, again, it's Mark Douglas that released this article, and I wanted to kind of mention that is what it again emphasizes that obviously Mark Douglas has the contacts in Newcastle, and it's not the only journalist too, but he has contacts specifically to Paul Mitchell himself. He's the only journalist who's managed to sit him down for an hour and a half and have this lengthy conversation. So again, it's very interesting that this article has come from Mark Douglas himself. So there is fresh interest in Almiron from Brazil. And that makes me think of Jamal Lewis, who's currently in Brazil. Turkey and the US could help the agile mix Magpies free up budget heading into the transfer window. So again, Newcastle are signaling their intent. Say this source that Mark Douglas is talking to is Paul Mitchell, someone close to Paul Mitchell. I think what they're using this article to do, in my view, is to signal Newcastle's intent that they're going to be very focused on selling players in this upcoming transfer window. And one of those players is going to be Almiron. And I think they're trying to drum up some interest there. I think they're trying to sell, there was a figure of 15 million for Almiron. And I didn't realize, I think his contract runs out in 2026. I kept on thinking it's 25, but it's 2026. And so they're trying to sell him for 15 million. I think when you're doing that, I think that, as we always know, when you're trying to sell something, there's a price that you really want. There's a likely price you're likely to achieve. And there's that bottom of the basement if there's there's nobody coming in for whatever you're trying to sell. And so this particular article tells me that Newcastle will probably sell Almiron for between 10 to 12 million in the January transfer window if they could. And that would enable them to move forward with other purchases as well. They talked about Mark Gahey. Mark Gahey has obviously been coming up as well. And I think what it is looking like is interesting. And let me know what you guys think about this, because there's been various kind of conversations about what the price for Mark Gahey is going to be. And you hear a couple of things. So the last thing I heard, there was obviously an article released by Scott Wilson saying that Newcastle are trying to, if they were to purchase Mark Gahey, it will have to be for a significantly less price than the one they put up in the transfer window in the previous summer window, because by this January transfer window, should Mark Gahey not start sign an extension or renew his contract, he'll have 18 months left. And so his price goes back down. And they kind of made some intermissions as well that, Mark Gahey's performances have been erratic as well. So it has to be a lot less. The last price that we know that's kind of been, not me personally, but we know from reading articles, it's looking like it's around 50 million plus is what Newcastle were offering. And in fact, I think Paul Mitchell himself said again to Mark Douglas, which was, we made the final offer for Mark Gahey 17 days before the transfer window actually closed. So it wasn't like this thing people were saying, he was 50 million one week, it was 55 million the second week. It was, as the days are rolling down, it's 55, 50, 60, 65, 70 million. Mr. Parrish was doing a world tour, media tour, saying if you want superstar players, you get superstar money. It wasn't that at all. And that tells you a lot, actually, in terms of where rival clubs see Mark Gahey and what they're willing to pay for him. And I think that's even the conversations that Paul Mitchell is saying, because there's no one really actually competing for Mark Gahey with us. And it's not to say Mark Gahey isn't great. I think he is great. He's just not 15 plus million defender. And so, what is the price for Mark Gahey? Let me know, what is the price that you pay for Mark Gahey? Before that Scott Wilson article, my thoughts were that Newcastle probably may stick to that. After saying all that, I thought Newcastle might stick to that price of maybe 55 million for Mark Gahey in the January transfer window, just because should if were Newcastle to go lower, Palace might take their chances and take him to the next transfer window, summer transfer window. Maybe the initial price will be 35, 40 million, and that's when you get your Liverpools, your Tottenhams, maybe your Chelseas and others interested in now, and then you can really start a little bidding more there. And so that would make things a lot more complicated for Newcastle in terms of getting Mark Gahey over the line. And so if you pay their 55 million now, where there's relatively none to little competition or anybody willing to match it, it puts you ahead in terms of getting Mark Gahey. But having said all of that, guys, all this conversation around what I've mentioned earlier, where does fit in 55 million for Mark Gahey fit into this kind of model? I think if you're asking Paul Mitchell, would you pay 50 million for Mark Gahey? He'll say to you, I can get you 2, maybe 3 Mark Gaheys for 50 million. I think that'll be Paul. I think that'll be Paul Mitchell's answer if he's talking to his mate, a very, very close mate that is not linked to the media. He would be probably saying, "I know Eddie Howe wants Mark Gahey. The guy costs 50 million. I can get 3 players, 3 defenders who can get it for 50 million." Where does that fit into the owner's longer term strategy for Mark Gahey? Well, the longer term, their shorter term strategy, at least for this season, and I think this would be Eddie Howe's argument, is, do you want to get into Europe? Their answer will be yes. Mark Gahey is the guy. Mark Gahey's my guy. I'm sure there's other. We know they went for other players, but he fits the mold that we know that Eddie Howe wants. Premier League certified, Premier League proven, England international, number 6 shirt. Interestingly enough, and I'm gonna give a profile. I've got a new thought that's emerging that I think that Mark Gahey profile is the new DM. People are looking for DMs, midfield DMs. I think the new DMs are centre backs that can play in midfield, and I think that's why they want him. He pushes up. The whole team pushes up together with Bruno, Joe Linton, Tonali. They'll go up. It makes a huge difference to how Newcastle play. And I think that's his argument. They're saying, look, we paid the 50 million now. He can help us get across the line. What Paul Mitchell is saying is, we can get I'm not saying he can. I'm just imagining we can get a Tapsoba type of player from Germany, from wherever, who for 30, 35 million. I'm telling you, can do the same job as Mark Gahey and will get us into Europe the same way. And I think that's where the bumping of heads could be. And it goes back to Mighty Wynn's last point, which is managers still have a say, or like a final say, which is true, which is you can't just say, what did Mike Wynn say? Man City's blueprint is Pep. Sorry, you said Man City's blueprint still has the final say. And it's true. And it's not just Pep. And that is Pep in himself, but it's not just Pep, but you can be a sports director who wants his way, but you got to have a manager on board. And I think the owners have got to be on board and they've got to trust it. But 50, 55 million, if our budget is indeed 100, 108 million for next two transfer windows, it's a massive chunk out of our transfer budget. And so, like I said, Eddie's incentives, Eddie's agenda, as it should be, is a shorter term to a Paul Mitchell's. His one is, we need to get into Europe this year, now, Champions League preferably. If Newcastle buy a Mark Gahey for 55 million, Paul Mitchell might not be too happy about that. But if Newcastle get into the Champions League, I think the owners will wipe the tears from their eyes, and they won't be too worried about it. So, it'd be interesting to see where that goes and how that is. I don't expect. What I will say on the final thing about that is, I don't expect a long. I really hope so, but I don't expect a saga over Mark Gahey in the January transfer window. I think Newcastle maybe first couple of days, and then move on, because I think enough is enough of that one. And I think maybe that's the compromise that Paul Mitchell and Eddie Howe reach, where they say, look, we'll go for Mark Gahey for the first week. After that, we're moving on, mate. And that's it. So, and in terms of Pep, just to add on Pep, yes, Pep has the final say, but Pep doesn't do the scouting, doesn't do the recruiting or anything else. He does really just manage the team. And so that's why Man City, even when Pep leaves, and to say that there will be a shift because he's a legend, Man City will continue to move on. Mighty Win, great crack, Philip. Got to shoot because we're live at 9:30. Catch the rest later, mate. Big up to you, Mighty Win. Good to have you, sir. Much appreciated. Jonathan Shaw, good to see you, sir. Good to see you. The most I would pay is 50 million and no more. Yeah. The 70 million in the summer was the England tax. And at the start of the window, we were interested in the AC. Yeah, Malik Chow, defender, who would be a quality addition. Malik Chow has a slightly different profile, though. He's more of a destroyer, athletic and strong. He wouldn't be used in the same way as a Mark Gahey would be used. Mark Gahey is the player that brings the ball out. He can join the midfield almost. He can. He can join the midfield. Your Bruno Gomes, your Tonali's, your Joe Linton's will all push up even further, and he would help. Kind of what Mark Gahey would do is help a Bruno Gomes. Maybe even you'll have a Lewis Hall inverting, and you see Newcastle really pushing up high up the pitch and having it in a more structured way. That's why he's so valuable. And Malik Chow, though, he can do that. He doesn't carry the ball the same way. He doesn't break the lines in the same way. He doesn't read play the same way either. But also, he's in Italy. He's 23, 24. He's very young compared to, Mark Gahey's young, but he's got that Premier League experience. And that's why Eddie Howe is so strong on him. But I think Paul Mitchell will be saying, Malik Chow. But yeah, really great comment there. Jonathan Shaw, unless something drastic happens with the City case, I can see us having to sell one of our big hitters sometime soon. Well, you know what? That could happen. But I think this is what Paul Mitchell has been assigned, has been brought in by the owners to help avoid us do, which is to buy players, and then going back to the transfer windows, to buy your Fabio Carvalhos and your I forgot that guy's name for Liverpool, where you buy players who aren't necessarily going to, you might have the intention to, but you know that they might not get into your first team, but you hope to loan them out, bring money in from their loan fees, and eventually sell them for a fee as well, and kind of sell them for a higher fee which Liverpool did made £50 million, and were able to avoid selling your big hitters, your Luis Diaz's and your Jotas and others. And so that's what Newcastle are trying to do. They're essentially trying to buy more Yankuba Mintes. And I know that's controversial now because of what everyone is saying. One of the things from the article, going back to it, was from the Mark Douglas article, was Minte was a fumble. Talk about Minte being a fumble, essentially, by Newcastle United. In my view, Minte wasn't a fumble. Minte was a forced sell. We were forced to sell him because otherwise that would mean that we'd have to sell one of our big hitters, which is obviously Anthony Gordon. But on Anthony Gordon and on the article as well was Ted Knutson, the former CEO of StatsBomb, said, "Yeah, Newcastle should have sold Gordon. You should have sold Gordon and kept Elliot Anderson and especially Yankuba Minte." What do you guys? Well, he didn't say the next part, but if you read between the lines, if we sold Anthony Gordon, we wouldn't have to sell Yankuba Minte, and we probably would not have to sell Elliot Anderson. What do you guys think of that? Now, hindsight is 2020 vision. Hindsight is 2020 vision. But we're going to ask the question anyway. Would you have rather Newcastle sell Anthony Gordon in order for us to keep Yankuba Minte and Elliot Anderson? And I want you to picture this. If Newcastle kept Yankuba Minte, across our front line at the moment, would have Yankuba Minte with Jacob Murphy in support and Almiron in support. In the middle, would have Isak with Callum Wilson in behind him and Osola in behind him. On our left wing forward position would have Harvey Barnes, but would also have Elliot Anderson, Joe Linton, and Joe Willock. Had we sold Anthony Gordon and kept Yankuba Minte? Let me know what your thoughts about that. I haven't quite made up my mind about it. I think I have made up my mind about it, actually. And I think the only reason that, or the big reason why Newcastle didn't sell him, and it's the reason why I agree with it, is the perspective. If Newcastle sold one of their blue chip players, that is one of their most important players, Anthony Gordon, who's part of Bruno Gomes, Isak, Sven Botman, the perspective, the image that gives is that Newcastle are there to sell. They're vulnerable to selling their big players, and that could have a detrimental ripple effect on the squad as a whole. And so, by keeping Anthony Gordon, securing him on a longer term contract, we've now obviously got Isak. We've already secured Bruno Gomes, Joe Linton, and others. We're showing ambition by keeping our big players, and I think that's the main reason why Newcastle have rather sold a Minte and Elliot Anderson than it was to keep Anthony Gordon. That's why hindsight is 2020 vision. We can look back now and say, look at how Yankuba is playing for Brighton. Look at Elliot Anderson. We knew how Elliot Anderson would do for Nottingham Forest. It was better to keep them. But I think it was the right decision by Newcastle United. And look, for those that are just coming in, the question is, would you rather, going back, would you have rather sold Anthony Gordon and kept Yankuba Minte and Elliot Anderson? Or did Newcastle make the right decision in selling Yankuba and selling Anderson in order to keep Anthony Gordon? I think Newcastle eventually made the right decision. A couple of things from the article before we move on. Like I said, Ted Knutson didn't think our transfers made sense because of, like I said, and I mentioned it earlier, that because we bought quality players, but for prices that were very, very high, and that we could have bought the same quality of players from different leagues and different places, but the quality would have been just as good. And I think this was Paul Mitchell's take when he spoke to Mark Douglas in the hour and a half interview. So that's a food for thought there as well. Um, Newcastle do use data, but previously they used data really kind of, they've already identified the players they want, and they kind of then kind of getting a kind of a sense check. Was it the right thing? Rather, where it looks like it might be changing into Newcastle using the data, sending the scouts out, and kind of going forward. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that will be that way. I think maybe how Newcastle use the data will be the same, because Paul Mitchell did once say that he's not data driven, but he does, I think, it's data led, something along the lines. That's my kind of take on it. I don't think, which I think means that yes, he likes data, he likes things like StatsBomb, but he's not totally he still believes in scouting. Remember, this guy comes from a heavy scouting background, and I think that's where him and Hal would be aligned on that as well. Yeah, we talked about the owners thinking and the 5 clubs. Yeah, so that was it really. That was the article. That's where it was at. We talked about also the Newcastle's preparation for the transfer window. I think they've got 100 million plus. They're looking to sell players. I also think, and let me know what you guys think. Obviously, we had I think they're going to be looking for buy to sell players. I think they're going to be looking for a lot of young players. I think they're going to be looking for young players and players from foreign fields. I don't know how many players that will be, but there'll be a lot of players. I think there'll be a few players they're going to look to do that with and to buy those kind of players as well. Which will be really interesting to see. We talked about Mark Gahey. I think Mark Gahey I think they'll try him for the first week, put down 50 million. If Palace don't pick that up and say we're going to take our chances in the summer, very well. But I don't see Newcastle pushing for that too hard. And I'm going to go to the comments, but yeah, that's where Newcastle are at. I was going to talk about there are several kind of touch on the ATP point. Should I talk about it? Should I talk about it? I'm gonna park it for now, or I might come back to it. Player recruitment. So there's several players. There's a number of players that Newcastle have been rumored to look at, and this is from our man Toon Talk, also known as Connor, who collects all of these kind of informations as well from various news outlets that are publicly known to us as well. And again, I was going to go deeply into some of the profiles. I'm not going to go into all. I'm going to point out a player that I think Newcastle might go for. But before I do that, let's go into my point is, what did I miss? Okay, so unless I'm in the case, I see us having someone of our big hitters soon. Yeah. Oh, my point is, Gahey is a quality player, but there are many more that could grow with our team. Gahey isn't the only centre back out there. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Paul Mitchell was trying to say to Eddie Howe. And when Eddie Howe is saying, "Hey, do you want to get into the Champions League?" Then Mark Gahey is our man. I think that's what he's trying to say back. Jonathan Shaw, we could do with Minte and Anderson now. We could, and I think if we had a better transfer strategy at the beginning of the takeover, but again, hindsight. We still got so many quality players and everything else. I feel it's a bit. To have that kind of ability to look back and say, yeah, we could have done this, we could have done that, is a luxury that I can afford. But at the time when we're facing relegation and all these type of things, the players that were brought in all made sense. Literally, all of them made sense. But I agree with you. It would have been great not to have to sell Anderson, not to have to sell Minte, not to have to sell Gordon, and to be able to buy players because our recruitment strategy was better than it was. That would have been the ideal situation. Yeah, I've done this. Okay, so you would have done the swap. Gordon for Anderson and Minte. Very interesting, Shaw. Big up to you for sticking your chest out there and letting people know. And finally, I don't think there's a right answer anyway. It's all relative. And as you say, everything is easy with the benefit of hindsight. I've got complete trust in the owners. They are not, they're not Mike Ashley and exactly. They're not Mike Ashley at all. So, taking all of that into consideration, players Look, Newcastle have been linked with a number of players. Let me see how you guys can see this on the screen, because maybe I need to enlarge it. Let me make sure. What can you guys see? Yeah, okay. I'll enlarge it a little bit though. So, did I want to touch on it? Guys, I want to talk. I do want to talk. I do want to touch on, before I go into the players and finish this up, I want to touch on what Simon Jordan said about the ATP. I'm going to go back. Guys. I'm going to go back, because it also ties into everything that we've been talking about, which is our leadership, our structure, our philosophy going forward, our being able to compete with all the top teams, the elite teams, not just to get into Europe, which is obviously important, but also to be able to compete in a sustainable way, and to be able to compete on an even playing field as well. But we can't do that. If the playing field isn't fair and isn't equal. And that's what brings me to this clip of a very recent clip of Simon Jordan, and where is this? Yeah, that's it. And Simon Jordan on TalkSport and what he says. And again, as people might know, Simon Jordan is an ex-owner of Crystal Palace, pundit on TalkSport. I really enjoy his punditry. I know that people don't always like everything about him and what he has to say necessarily, and that's fine. I'm just interested in good punditry, and I'm interested in good information. So look, they're discussing the ATP, City winning their legal case. I think the overall thoughts among the panel here, Simon Jordan, there's a gentleman called Stefan, who's like an expert in Premier League, the rules and transfers and the law and everything else, and obviously Mr. White himself. And there's a general consensus that Man City won. I know there was a big debate about whether Man City won, because they actually came for 25, but they only won 2. But you only need to win one of those cases, which Man City did. So there's a general consensus that Man City won. But now they've shifted the conversation and they've moved it on to talk about the Premier League, the PSR in itself. So they're talking about PSR in itself, and they're talking about the Premier League as well, and this kind of construction of PSR, and what is its purpose, and is it fulfilling its purpose? So essentially, is it making a fair playing field, an even playing field for the Premier League, not to create equal outcomes, but is it making it a fair playing field? Is that what it created? And I'm going to go into Simon Jordan's, and it's always interesting, because sometimes we can have confirmation bias, and maybe that's what I have. I don't know. I like to think not, and it's not because Simon Jordan is saying something that I agree with. I hope not. Maybe partly it is. But because it's interesting that it's coming from him, and he does make the point when he says this, and there's an overall thing to this. When he says essentially what he's about to say about the ATP being there to support the cartel, he sort of says it. He says it, but he's not happy to say it. And I kind of come from the same place where if you asked him 18 months ago, he would have said to you, PSR is a good thing. It's the right thing to do, because you can't have the Premier League bombarded by. It can't handle. It's not built to handle the type of owners that Newcastle have, for instance. Even it can barely handle the owners that we currently have in Man United and others, who are not just rich in the sense of money, but they're powerful too. And there's the politics and the global politics that comes with it as well. And so he would have said, look, we've got to have a way to be able to ensure that the product that is the Premier League, the cultural heritage that we have of the Premier League, we have to maintain it. And at the time, things like the PSR if you asked them, would have made sense. However, since it has been applied and how it's been applied and the revelations from that, it's made things worse. And so I'm going to take you to his point. And like I said earlier, I know that he's saying the point that I agree with. And I'm sure maybe some people that are listening to this are agreeing to, but he makes it from a point of like, it's sad that this has been the case. And I agree. It's sad that this is how it's kind of been the outcome. So let me make sure that the adverts that come. I'm going to play this. I'm going to see what you guys think, and I'm going to break it down before I go into it. Okay, yeah, okay. So let me just.
You need some form of.
All right, so just one moment. All right, let me make sure you guys can see this. Can you see it? All right, excellent. You can see it. All right, so let's break this down.
Of governance, I don't support the implementation of something that.
All right, let me just go back a little bit. So the question is does PSR work? Like, has PSR worked? Like, do you support the rules? Do you support the rules of PSR?
I support the rules, or you don't.
Well, I support the rules insofar as you need some form of governance. I don't support the implementation of something that clearly doesn't work.
Right. So you do need rules. You know, we're not saying, and I don't think Man City are saying this. I don't think myself as a Newcastle fan, I'm sure Newcastle fans in general are saying this, no rules. And in the extreme, I've heard people say like, spend whatever you want. If our owners really spent what the league will go into meltdown. The ecosystem of the Premier League and football in general will go into meltdown. So, you know, I as much as I want Newcastle to be the best team, the best club in the world, I don't want to flood and destroy the football in order to achieve that. So you got to have rules.
I don't think PSR is a good thing.
So I don't think PSR is a good thing. You know, let's figure out why.
I thought it was once upon a time. I thought it was about doing something different than what it's doing. I thought it was about controlling transfer fees and wages and gave people a chance. It's not.
This is what he thought it was about. So this is not coming from a place of, you know, people. I know a lot of people have kind of said, you know, this like what it was there for, what it was supposed to be for. Like I said, just controlling wages, controlling transfer fees, which at the time, especially 2 years ago, were going out of control. So PSR was there to help stop that. That's what he thought it was there. It was to help stop your Blackburn situations happening, Portsmouth, your Leeds, all these type of things, situations from happening. It didn't. It made things worse. I'm going to go into that second part, what he's about to say. Just going to go through the comments. Jonathan Shaw, SJ, I think Simon Jordan has went up in my estimations. He's fighting our cases with the PSR tribe. Yeah, yes, he is. Jonathan Shaw, got to go now, Philip. Big up to you, Jonathan Shaw. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for coming in. I love your content, and it's a shame It's a shame you got more followers yet. I think it's a shame I haven't got more followers yet. I hope I haven't got more followers yet. I'm sure you will, given time, make a lot more sense than many other sites on YouTube. Jules, it's up, mate. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, guys. But let me know, guys. There's 7 of you in here. If there's more, do send in your comments, send in your views. Let me know what you guys think. So going back to this, I'm gonna just reverse it a little bit. Simon Jordan is saying, listen, PSR was meant to be here to control wages, to control fees. I thought that's what it was there for. That's why I was in support of it. That's not been proven the case.
I thought it was about controlling transfer fees and wages and gave people a chance. It's not about that. It's about maintaining a cartel.
It's about, and that's the big sentence right there. It's not about that. It's about maintaining the cartel. It's about maintaining the stranglehold that a group of teams, and we all know who they are, that have had on the Premier League so far. And I don't say this with vindication or anything like that, because for a very, very long time, I've been very quietly kind of sitting on the fence about this, and it's only been really kind of well-known kind of Newcastle fans like Keith Patterson and others who kind of educated my mind on this. And big up to Keith Patterson. Anybody who knows him, he's on the professionals with Steve Ray from the part, who's been fighting this cause for a very long time. Listen, that I've been, but like I had the kind of same view as Simon Jordan, that we do have to have rules. We can't be out of control. It can't be a wild west. I thought, is the PSR here for that? Is it not for that? And it's turned out it's not. It's there to help the top clubs remain the top clubs. And I know there have been fans, and look, nobody can know this for sure. And at the time, some people were saying that PSR, the Premier League, the setup of the Premier League, like how they're kind of governing, is the beacon of democracy, because you get to vote these things in. Clubs have been able to vote these things in. You can vote things in, but you can also change your mind about those things. And when clubs have voted in PSR, they're like, there's clubs out there saying, nah, this isn't working how we thought it would work. But let Simon Jordan finish what he was thinking, what he was saying. He's saying, I thought it was here to control wages and transfer fees and everything else. It's not here for that. It's there to maintain their cartel.
Maintaining a cartel. I think the investment, I don't like anything that...
Let me just go back a little bit there. I want him to repeat that point. Here we go.
Not about that. It's about maintaining a cartel.
Yeah.
I think the investment, I don't like anything that restricts investment, and I think PSR does that. And I think
I don't like anything that restricts investment. When Newcastle players were in wheelie bins because we had no hydration pools, when Mike Ashley was using Sports Direct and he was using St. James's Park, was using Newcastle as the whole club as for his own gain to advertise Sports Direct and others, where he was even on our stadium naming rights when you paid 300k, there was nobody there from the other clubs, from the top 6 clubs, who was fighting for our cause and saying that is bad. That is doing harm to our club, paying 300k for that. None of those clubs are doing that. So when Newcastle were being damaged like that, when they were going through 2 relegations in 10 years because of poor, neglectful management from its owner, who was using it in a destructive way, nobody there was standing up for Newcastle. Nobody was doing that.
Everything that the Premier League has been so successful in achieving over the last 30 years, it's beginning to busily unwind and will create a problem for itself. What you're going to get is the ministry.
Right. So everything the Premier League helped to build in itself is now unwinding because of stuff like this. So look, to summarize this, TalkSport, they summed it up. Simon Jordan summed it up. He's coming from a place of, look, it's sad like that. This is where it's come down to. It's come down to this, where we thought the PSR was here for to control wages, to control transfer fees, to give people a chance to be able to compete, to invest in their club and to be able to compete. That if I'm Newcastle, if I'm Bournemouth, if I'm Brighton, if I'm all these other clubs, I stand the chance to be in upper echelons. I have a chance to go into the Champions League, to maybe compete for the league one day. But instead, what it's turned out to be, and what it is to allow other clubs to maintain a a stranglehold on Newcastle on and maintain their and to maintain their ability to stay at the top. The idea that the Premier League and how the governorship and the PSR can be a democratic process in the context of a highly competitive Premier League and the clubs there is laughable. And so this is what Newcastle have been up against. And I haven't even shown, obviously, everyone saw the emails that happened within 5 days, or within a couple of days of Newcastle's takeover, where a CEO of another unnamed club gathered several other clubs to come together to create new rules around 80 around transactions in order to stifle any potential financial growth of Newcastle United, to lobby the Premier League with these rules, which the Premier League then ratified and put it into its laws, some of them. It shows you that it's not a fair and democratic situation for Newcastle United. So Newcastle and its owners have all these things to compete against, which is a sad situation. So look, going back to everything that we were talking about, Newcastle have to be first class in everything. They have to be first class not only in the medical department, the transfers, the recruitment, their players, their managers, but also in their lawyers, by the sounds of it, in order to compete with rival clubs. So there's very little room for error for Newcastle. So I wanted to go into, I'm going to finish this up. I'm going to finish the show up because the show was intended, we've gone quite a bit, but I wanted to just finish up with Newcastle's next games. The players have returned. Let me see if I can get this up. The players have returned, or returning. I think on Wednesday, Thursday, some of them are returning. And where are you? I'm going to look at the fixture list because what my plans is for the next show on Thursday is to do a preview for the Brighton game. But I wanted to look at, let me see if I can get this up, Newcastle's next games after the international breaks. And I wanted to get from you guys, what is your thoughts on where Newcastle could be? What are your kind of expectations of what Newcastle could achieve in this next round of fixtures? Let's see what we can get. Here we go. Because my thoughts and my hopes are that Newcastle maintain their stay in the cup. Obviously, that Newcastle stay in the club. They play Chelsea at home at St. James's Park. We've got a very tricky tie with Chelsea. We've got kind of two ties with Chelsea. Let me get this up. Where are you? Where obviously we played Chelsea twice in the space of a week, in the space of like 4 or 5 days. The first one in the Premier League, obviously, which is a Saturday next week, Saturday. And then about 3-4 days later, on a Tuesday, Wednesday, we played them at home at St. James's Park, which I'm happy about that it's at St. James's Park because that helps us a lot. It doesn't help Chelsea, but it helps us, which is the point. Where are you? Here we go. Yeah, here we go. So here is the window. So from now, let me get this closer in. So from now, when they return on the, where are you? Drew Everton. 19th of October, 4 days from now, we've got Brighton. I'm going to be doing a pre-game preview for the Brighton game on Thursday, 8:30 p.m. That tactical breakdown. I hope you guys can be there with me. We've got Brighton on 19th of October, Chelsea 27th the following week. Then about 3 days later, 30th of October, we play Chelsea at home at St. James's Park. Whoa, I went up there. And we've got 2nd November Arsenal before finishing things up before the international break again. On the 10th of November, we play Forest away. So we've got how many Premier League games? 1 Brighton, 2 Chelsea, 3 Arsenal, 4 Nottingham Forest. So that's 4 Premier League games there. How many at home? We play Arsenal at home, Forest away, Chelsea. No, we play Chelsea away, Brighton at home, Arsenal at home, Chelsea away, Forest away. Tough games, guys. And in an ideal world, when the whole team stays fit, stays firing. Give me your points predictions. What do you guys think so far? Where do you think this team can do if everyone stays fit? Callum Wilson's due back, Isak is due back. That'll be good. That'll be great. What can Newcastle achieve in that time? I'm gonna say this. My expectation for Newcastle is to get anywhere between 6 to 8 points from the Premier League. If they achieve 7 points in 4 games, and those especially 2 very tough away games there, and very tough home games really against Brighton and Arsenal, that would be fantastic. And if we stay in the League Cup, we beat Chelsea, that would be exceptional. And I'm backing Newcastle to do that. So for me, there's 7 points from 4 games in the Premier League, and for Newcastle to stay in the Premier League, that is what I think. But let me know what you guys think. So, guys, I'm going to wrap this show up. We talked about, let me make sure that you guys can see this. We talked about, take that off. Make sure you guys can see. So we talked about Mark Douglas' article, the stats bomb, where we talked about the implementation of data-driven recruitment strategies, where we talked about how it's going to help Newcastle, but we talked about the overall structure of Newcastle. Let me get this up on the screen. We talked about, but what does it say about, because they're more important, the wider picture for Newcastle is, where does this line up with our current structure, our current leadership structure, our philosophy on the pitch? What is it? How does it align with the incentives of an Eddie Howe, of a Paul Mitchell? How are they going to work together? Because if they can align very well, things like stats bomb, things like recruitment can all work really, really well. And there's a wide incentive for Newcastle. It also makes the transfer window very interesting. Do we go in for Mark Gahey? How much do we pay for a Mark Gahey? What other players do we expect to go in for? How does it work for Newcastle? Can we be competitive? We talked about the preparation for the transfer window, how much money we think we're going to have, maybe 100 million. For instance, for the next 2 transfer windows, can we sell Almiron? Who else can we sell? We're looking to be very focused on selling in that transfer window as well. Whose contracts are going to be renewed? We didn't get to chat too much about that as well. That's going to be on the thing, and how all these things align. But we also talked about Simon Jordan's comments that the PSR essentially has been maintaining the cartel. It hasn't been serving its purpose, which is around ensuring that wages and transfer fees don't go out of hand, but instead it has stopped investment, or has stifled or reduced investment for owners to be able to invest into their clubs. Like Newcastle United, it has maintained the stranglehold of the very few clubs at the top of the pyramid in the Premier League and football in general, and it's been designed to do so, and it's been proven to do so. This is obviously, has been said now in court, that this is me now. Simon Jordan has obviously said this in terms of the PSR maintaining the stronghold of these clubs. And also what Man City, the evidence that Man City have brought forward, which includes a CEO from a rival club gathering several other Premier League clubs together in order to force and lobby the Premier League to come against the Premier League, to lobby the Premier League to come against Newcastle, to come against other Gulf state clubs, in order to ensure that they're not able to invest into their clubs, that those clubs are not able to compete against them. So we've summarized that as well. These are the things that Newcastle are competing against as well, all those type of situations. But we also talked about, and finally ending on things, as the Newcastle players return from international duty, we have, and for the next period between the 19th of October and the 10th of November, Newcastle have 4 Premier League games and they have 1 League Cup game, obviously. And what's our estimations? Where could it be? Where would Newcastle likely end up in that? I've said I think Newcastle play Brighton at home, Arsenal at home. They play Chelsea away for the Premier League, and they play Nottingham Forest away. If you were to be able to give a points estimation, what would that be? I think Newcastle can get 7 points from 4 games in that. And I think Newcastle can also beat Chelsea and stay in the League Cup. And that would be an incredible results for Newcastle before the international break. I think that would be absolutely massive. And guys, that's been the summary of what we've been doing. In conclusion, I think when we're talking about the direction that Newcastle are going in, they're essentially they're going through that process of realignment. I think what the owners are trying, they have a short-term view, which is Newcastle to get into Europe, and I think that will back Newcastle and how they kind of move forward. They have a short-term view on how they maybe move in the transfer window. It kind of maybe gives a reason as to why we're still in for Mark Gahey. But there's a long-term view also in terms of buying in players that will be buy to sell, but buying academy players, also very strong and selling as well. All those type of things. So they're trying. They have to be more savvy. They have to be more smart. They have to be more strategic. They're going to try and replicate some of the kind of elite clubs in terms of how they're managed and function, like your Liverpools, your Brightons, your Brentfords, and trying to get Newcastle to that level. And so I think that's where the ownership are moving forward to. We're yet to find out where Eddie Howe fits into that. So far, he's playing well, he's playing nice. Obviously, his objective is to get Newcastle into Europe. That's the ownership objective. How that's going to align to Paul Mitchell will be very, very interesting. Paul Mitchell still wants to get Newcastle into Europe as well, but he also has to maintain a long-term, sustainable success for Newcastle as well. So before we wrap it up, guys, I've got a final comment here from Jordan Brentmore. Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Philip, your pictures are wrong. Mitchell is even with the CEO. He was hired by PIF. He's a top man of football-related decisions. He doesn't work for Darren Eales. He works for the chairman. You could be right there, Jordan. If I did get that from, there was an article, and I'll show it in my next show, possibly. Remind me to do so, where essentially Paul Mitchell is a sports director, is obviously above everybody else in terms of Eddie Howe, Bunce, and everybody else. But Darren Eales as a CEO, he not only. So let me actually show you. So I got a bigger picture of that as well, where Darren Eales is responsible for managing these teams, but also the financial and the commercial side of things. So I don't know I don't know how they communicate, what the chain of the command is, for instance. Can I find it? Yes. So I had it like this originally, but I think if we're talking about hierarchy, the CEO was usually above the director of football. But if you have a graphic, or if you have some articles that say what you're saying, do send them over to me. I'll be very, very happy to correct that. I need to find the article where I saw that in, but I think essentially Paul Mitchell does answer to Darren Eales because as you know, Yasser Al-Rumayyan isn't their part. So because Darren Eales manages the overall day-to-day operations of Newcastle, Yasser Al-Rumayyan, he manages a whole portfolio for PIF. So he can't be there on a day-to-day. He goes when he needs an update on the general well-being status of Newcastle United. He goes to Darren Eales. He doesn't go to Paul Mitchell, because Darren Eales manages the entire overall structure of Newcastle, the commercial side and the sports side, which includes what's his name? Which includes Paul Mitchell. So yeah, so let me know. Let me know if you've got any graphics, anything to work towards what you're saying. I'd be happy to correct that. But that's where I got my information from. And finally, Hunter, thoughts on Tuchel? Thoughts on Tuchel? Look, he's a high caliber manager. I think my initial thoughts is that I think national teams primary objective should be able to hire coaches and managers from those nations. So if I'm Greece, I try to the priority is to manage to have Greek or Greek nationality coaches or whatnot. I can't remember. I know that they did that with Southgate, obviously, and maybe they're choosing a different path. But the reason why England went to foreign coaches in the first place before Gareth Southgate is because they wanted to play a particular brand of football. They wanted to change that as well, the kind of DNA of their kind of overall England setup, which they've done and completed now. And so I thought that maybe the focus, why not a Graham Potter? And as much as I want Eddie Howe, why not an Eddie Howe and whatnot to kind of step into that? But again, Tuchel's resume trumps both of theirs as well. So maybe that's what they're looking at. So yeah, my initial thoughts are to go for the coach from that nation. But in terms of his resume, his caliber, his character, it's unquestioned. And so we'll see where England go from there. I'll be very keen to see. A good appointment overall, a very good appointment overall, Hunter. But thank you guys for all your comments, all your questions. It's been a terrific show. Let me know your thoughts and views as always about everything that we've discussed around this data-driven stuff. Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, recruitment strategy, where Newcastle are heading to. Who do you think they're going to buy? Who do you think they're going to sell? Also, what do you think Newcastle are going to get in the next 4 games, Premier League 4 games? Do you think they're going to stay in the League Cup? Let me know. Until next time, guys, as always, make sure you take care of each other. Have a very good night, good evening, and God bless you all. Take care, guys.